Carl, I wanna go to something real quick, a little clip here, and I want your perspective on this after this clip. Okay, it's a short clip, and I have a whole bunch of them because I didn't know what I wanted to ask you because there were so many things that are going on in the South China Sea and Central Asia that pertains to China and the United States. So I just put up a few different ones just in case. So I want to play this one particularly for you right here.
This is part of a broader policy of decoupling from China, which is absolutely insane. Even today, you had 5 major Chinese state companies, petro and chemical companies, announcing they're going to delist from the US stock exchange. You had the US coerce Latvia and Estonia into breaking off of the Central and Eastern Europe China agreements. The idea of decoupling from China is even more insane and suicidal than the suicidal sanctions against Russia, which everybody now knows are doing far, far more damage to the Western economies and devastating damage to the global South than it is to Russia and China. This is a Malthusian green policy in the West of self-destruction, of depopulation, of deindustrialization. And the sanctions policies, which supposedly are over geopolitics, actually go hand in hand with the self-destructive Green New Deal in the West, which is it's just leading towards a global hyperinflationary collapse of the Western financial system, the dollar-based system, and can only be seen as suicidal and has to be reformed.
So what is your take on what he was talking about? The decoupling, the U.S. and the West trying to decouple from China, the U.S. Putting pressure on European nations to force China's companies out of tech investment and 5 and 6G technology, and it's to those nations' detriment, and yet they will bow to the U.S. dictates, and like the European Union stated the other day that they see China as a threat, and that uh, they are against their interests, and that the now the South China Sea and Asia has become the focal point, and that the EU will not hesitate to act upon its own morals. We know that was the United States behind the scenes, but what have you to say about that stuff?
Yeah, I saw Ursula von der Leyen's speech in EU about how he vowed to stop China from invading Taiwan. Well, first of all, you and what army? I mean, Ursula, you are the president of EU Commission. You command no army, no air force, no navy. I mean, what authority do you have to stop China? Actually, I don't even know what her job is. I mean, other than acting as a spokesperson for Washington in Europe, what does she do exactly? I mean, people in the comments were saying she facilitates. She's a facilitator. But I mean, come on, like you can post all day. I mean, she went to like a Finnish nuclear bunker, talking about security for Europe. What do you do, Ursula? What in it? Like all she does is demonstrate to Washington, I am your reliable, loyal vassal to do whatever to pursue your interests on behalf of Washington rather on behalf of the European interests. That's what she's really signaling. But EU, are you kidding me? Like I mean, they're not even NATO. EU is not even NATO. Like, what's EU gonna do? And about decoupling, I think I talked about this last time. There was a clip surfaced by the former Trump, U.S. under the former Trump administration. She was a U.S. ambassador to NATO. I think her name is Kay Hutchinson, and she talked about China. She said, "Well, U.S. greatest strength is our economy. China may have a big army, their navy is growing, we know they have nuclear weapon, but what if they're starting to break down internally? What if they suffer internal problems? Our best leverage is to cause a collapse of China's economy."
What would we have to deter China? In my opinion, we have economic strength. China will probably have more military, bigger navies, more weapons, more missiles. They'll have nuclear. They've got space. They have a space station. They've got all of that. But what if they have an internal economic crisis because none of the major economies of the world were investing there, doing business there, creating jobs there? It would be the collapse of their economy that would be our best leverage.
I mean, she's publicly talking about this. Like this is just to, I mean, to bring harm to 1.4 billion people, just so U.S. can remain the top dog in the world. But this is what she's just speaking out aloud. She's just like, these things are not supposed to be voiced in the polite company, but she's just speaking out loud like Trump usually do. And this is what they think. And the problem with the U.S. elite at this point is just like the 71% of the Indian public who believe that India could win a war against China. These U.S. elites starting to imbibe their own propaganda. They're starting to believe their own propaganda. And so now they really believe, oh, it's easy. Chinese growth is all because this is what they believe. They believe the only reason China got to where it is today is because of West. Because we let them make toys for us, make us toys and shoes. This is how they got where they are today. And if we're just going to cut that off, they're going to go back to Stone Ages. You know, that's what they believe.
You've said in the past that the US foolishly fed the economic rise of China. The US is now working very closely with India. Do you foresee a potential rivalry with India in the future?
During that second half of the Cold War, we had a vested interest in helping China to get rich, because as China got rich, it helped us contain the Soviet Union. When the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union went away, my argument is we no longer have a vested interest in helping China to get rich.
It's so cut off from the reality. You know, China, like now they have driverless taxi in Chinese cities.
萝卜快跑来了！哦，来了！你赶快输。哦，门开了。哦哟，哎呦，好凉快啊！无人驾驶车，安全带系好了没有？好了。好，开始出发了。哦哟，好了。无人驾驶。哦，这里还有。
You know, like you think somehow, and actually, a lot of people don't even realize export as a percentage of GDP in China has been declining ever since 2013. I mean, now it's a single digit a component of the Chinese GDP, because China has been growing its own consumer economy, because China, like United States, is a continental sized economy. They have a lot, and they have a lot more people, and they have a lot more demand. Whereas when I grew up in China in 1980s, everything had to be imported. You know, China have to import everything from radio to fertilizer. You know, we use like Japanese made transistor radio, and because they're not, China produced crude oil at that time. China is an exporter of crude oil, if people could believe it, because China would export crude oil and in return getting refined gasoline and plastics and and fertilizers, all those petrochemical products, because China at that time didn't have enough refineries to refine its own crude oil. So China would export its crude oil to Japan and then get him back. You know, it's like China was exporting raw commodities and buying manufacturing goods. What really happened is the substitution. import substitution. So while China was making all these goods for export to the other countries, they're also making goods for themselves. So in the 1980s, our first TV, our first color TV was a Japanese, I think it was Sony, and our first refrigerator was also a Japanese refrigerator. Not because we were not patriotic. It's because at that time, China, in the early 80s, China did not produce color TV. It did not produce refrigerator. China only started produce refrigerator in 1986, after we have already bought our refrigerator. So what happened is, as the year progressed, as China is learning to make goods for the West, they're also learning to make goods for themselves. So they no longer rely on imports from abroad. And now China has 1.4 billion consumers. They have a huge consumer economy. And now the Chinese EV revolution is driven primarily by the internal market. Like all the Western politicians upping arms about Chinese EV exports. But the fact is, the Chinese EVs, 90% of the Chinese brands EVs were sold inside China. And the rest of the 10%, mostly they're not going to US or Europe because Biden is slapping on like 300% tariff. Most of them are going to global South countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. They're going. Some of them may make it to Australia and Europe, but most of them go to places like Brazil and Mexico. And the Biden tariff hit the hardest is Tesla. They hit Tesla because Tesla makes their cars in Shanghai, in the Shanghai Gigafactory. So most of the so-called Chinese EV exports to the Western market are the likes of Tesla and the likes of Volkswagen. They're through their joint ventures in China. They're making those cars. Now they're exporting back to their home market. So they're the ones taking the hit. The BYD, they're like, we're selling to Indonesia, we're selling to Mexico. Your 300% tariff doesn't affect us. But the people in Washington, they because they believe their own propaganda, they think, okay, all they got to do is cut off the ties with the Chinese economy. The whole goal of decoupling is so that when there's a war break out between China and the United States, they don't have to worry about backlash and collateral damage because of the intertwining economic ties. So their goal is like, okay, well, yeah, the problem obviously is because we're like joining at the hips. So we're just gonna separate them. They get, if they're Siamese twin, we're just gonna cut them in half. And yeah, that will totally work. That totally work. and then we can wage war against China. That's the whole Pentagon plan. But nobody is calling them out on this. This is like your plan is fundamentally flawed. When even Lockheed Martin, CEO of Lockheed Martin, has come out and said, yes, we do rely on the component source from China. We do not expect decoupling to happen 100% because we do need component source from China. The U.S. military-industrial complex today, as right now, would ground to a standstill if they do a complete decoupling today. They're gonna take them years trying to find alternative source and trying to build the domestic capability. So yeah, a lot of this decoupling just crazy talk by people who don't really understand the economy and don't really understand how the world works. And just so happen those same people are in the seats of power in Washington. they have no idea. They have no idea how the real economy is wrong. Because they probably don't even do their own shopping, right? I mean, they don't realize how many things are made in China. So this is a problem.
Let me make a little note. Don't forget, since they say that China is behind the West, China has the fastest supercomputers in the world now. So you have to look at that also. So that shows you the ingenuity, the independence, and the growth of China. Also, I wanted to get back. While we were talking about how China used to export raw materials and then get back refined goods. This is one of the things that's pissing the U.S. and the West off because China is in Africa helping the African nations to do the same thing now. Switch from just sending your raw goods to Europe and the United States, and China is setting up plants to refine those so that these governments can make more money so that they can invest more in healthcare and more in all kind of upgrades in the budget in school and everything else. And I think that is one of the things that has pissed the United States off because they were able to exploit that because those nations didn't have the refining capabilities or the factories to modify or to build certain things, and China has put a lot of that stuff there. So people say China is the manufacturer to the world. They forget that China has helped Africa to become the manufacturer to China. They don't say anything about that. And why do you think that they leave that out?
Well, it's inconvenient, Rasheed. It's inconvenient truth. This happened in Southeast Asia as well. For example, Indonesia, they have a lot of natural resources like nickel, cobalt that's needed for powering the electric transition. But they don't want to just export raw materials and then getting batteries in return. So China is actually pouring investment to help setting factories in Indonesia to process their nickels, their cobalt. And the question really is why United States complain about China's Belt and Road Initiative all the time. The question is, what are you offering? If you're complaining about China, what do you do? Why can't you do what China does, right? But that's not how they work. Because the Wall Street people, they run the numbers. They're like, nah, that doesn't justify all the effort. That's not enough profit margin for us. I'm sorry, right? But whereas China, they look at the long term. They're not looking at the quarterly earning reports. They're not looking at the stock price for this quarter. That's what the drivers in the West. In the West, you have to remember all the smart people. They all went to finance because that's where the money is. That's where you get most pay, and they just try. All the smartest people in the West right now are working on how to game the market. How to game the stock market, and everything is short term thinking. Whereas in China, they plan out for the future. They have 5-year plan, 10-year plans, and they actually carry it out. They actually implement what they said they're gonna do. And unlike U.S. politicians, they will say one thing and they will, like in case of Joe Biden, he will forget about it the next day. And then you have people like Trump. They will promise the moon, and of course they will not deliver. But China will actually do what they said that they set out to do. That's a different. And people that's why there's a huge gulf of perception of China in the global South countries versus the West, because the West, they always talk to themselves like international community. We, the international community. No, you're not the international community. Now when 80% of the world population lives outside of your so-called international community, and most of the world population, they see China a lot more positively than U.S. and its European vassal states views China. And this is why, because the U.S. sees China as competition. They're moving into this, they have been exploiting the global South very comfortably for centuries, right? And now China, all these Chinese investments, that means that those African countries don't have to go hats in hand to IMF and World Bank anymore, and that's unacceptable to them. For them, that's zero sum.
Yeah, I want to play this clip here, and I want you to give me your take on it afterwards. It's a short clip. It's about 2 minutes, so I'm going to play it.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have any great expectations of good developments taking place in the United States. I wish I could say the opposite. I've got no opposition to the people of the United States. For example, in things such as opposition to the Vietnam War, when I first came into politics, I cooperated with many people in the United States. I have nothing against ordinary Americans, whatever. But what is the case here is that the United States is trying to impose positions on the world which are not in the interests of the people of the world. It means that, for example, the United States is creating a higher price for oil. It's trying to, if you take China, where I'm obviously involved because I'm, work in Chinese university, it's trying to make people pay more for 5G by banning Huawei. It's trying to exclude Chinese companies from participating in the development of renewable energy, solar energy and other windmills and other things. And this is against the interests of the world. So we have a situation, obviously Iran has to pursue its own national interests. There's no problem about that. The United States pursues its own national interests also. But the point is that the national interests of Iran correspond with the general international interests of the population of the world, and the United States are against them. And that's why a very pleasant and good news about Iran's oil exports corresponds to that. It means the majority of the world's population doesn't want to go along with the US. They don't necessarily support Iran, they don't necessarily support China, which I'm involved with, but they don't want to be involved in the sanctions policy and the unilateral actions of the United States. So that's why Iran's oil exports have expanded.
Before you comment on that, I want you to make a mental note of what he was saying, because I have a minute and 24-second clip that I wanted to follow that up with, because it is very important that we hear these clips, because you see, everybody is starting to recognize that the United States is lashing out because it is no longer the dominant power and it sees a non-white, non-Western nation as its greatest threat. But I want to play this clip here. And this is very important. I think, where is it? Right here. I believe this is the one.
Well, because it's losing in peaceful economic competition. The United States claims its economy is dynamic, etc., but the real reality is that it's losing in the competition to China. I mean, if we take the situation in the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, in the 3 years of the pandemic, China's economy grew 2.5 times as fast as the United States. China grew over 13%, the US just over 5%. If you take the addition to world GDP in this period, it's 36% to China and about 16% to the United States. Then if you look at the individual companies, the US can't compete in telecommunications with Huawei. TikTok has become the most popular, so therefore the US is trying to ban Huawei. TikTok has become the most visited website in the world, so the US is now considering banning TikTok. Hikvision is the best producer of cameras for surveillance, etc. I mean, for safety surveillance in the world. So the US can't compete with that. The US admits that the whole solar power industry is totally dominated by China. The US is losing in peaceful economic competition. The only place in which it maintains a lead is military, because it spends more than the next 9 countries in the world put together. So therefore increasingly tends to try to put things on a military terrain. And this is very, very dangerous, because the world wants to get on with peaceful development, but the US wants to move things more and more towards military actions.
So on an equal playing field, we see that China is not just catching up with America, it has lapped America. And when you look at the true size of the GDP, China has the largest economy in the world when measured by what the CIA and the IMF measures, which is purchasing power parity. And the Chinese surpassed the United States in purchasing power parity in 2015. It was reported on CBS, ABC, NBC. I have the clips on my computer. China surpassed it. Do you believe that because they have been so dominant, and because they've had the advantage in technology, and had the advantage in military, and had the advantage in the bully pulpit, which is the media, and also had the advantage because at one time the dollar was the unquestioned world reserve currency. Do you believe now that the empire sees all of that tumbling down and they look at China as the greatest threat? Do you believe that it is skewing their vision and they are lashing out because China is a non-white, non-Western nation?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, they have themselves has said that. The former Trump national security advisor said that. She said because China is not Caucasian, and
When we think about the Soviet Union and that competition, in a way, it was a fight within the Western family. Karl Marx was a German Jew who developed a philosophy that was really within the larger body of political thought that reaches the work that you've done, that I've been involved with, that has some tenets even within classical liberalism. And so in that way, I think it was a huge fight within the Western family. And you could look at the Soviet Union, part West, part East, but it had some openings there that got us the Helsinki Final Act in 1975, which is, it was a really important Western concept that opened the door really to undermine the Soviet Union, a totalitarian state on human rights principles. That's not really possible with China. This is a fight with a really different civilization and a different ideology, and the United States hasn't had that before, nor has it had an economic competitor the way that we have. The Soviet Union was a country with nuclear weapons, a huge Red Army, but a backwards economy. And that was the insight of Reagan when the intel community told him differently. He said, I just don't see the signs that it can survive a technology race with the West. So in China, we have an economic competitor, we have an ideological competitor, one that really does seek a kind of global reach that many of us didn't expect a couple of decades ago. And I think it's also striking that it's the first time that we will have a great power competitor that is not Caucasian.
And I think all like of Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.
Some of those tenets, but a little bit different. And all of those things together are a bit perplexing for the American foreign policy establishment. And I think we have to, take the rose-colored glasses off and get real about the nature of the threat. And I think we also have to give a kind of respect for, I think, what the Chinese seek to accomplish.
But I do want to press you on that. I mean, the United States is not all Caucasian, right? But we're going to be majority-minority by 2050. And so is that even a relevant... I mean, if I think about the peoples who will, the different races and ethnicities who will make up the United States, Caucasians won't be a majority.
I think it's extremely relevant because the foreign policy establishment is so narrowly defined. It's more homogenous than probably it should be, given our own demographics. And that's why I think programs like the one at ASU that you've partnered with are extremely valuable in terms of developing a new cadre of foreign policy elites. But when I look back to who we went to graduate school, who populates IR departments at the elite universities,
no question
it hasn't changed very much. And so, and look at the faculties of the top 20 IR programs and public policy schools. So I think, having diversity on all dimensions really does help you get ready for the future. And when you don't have it, I think it hurts you. And the foreign policy elite community is pretty locked up right now.
The fact that but the problem is they still think they can reverse that process. They think, okay, we can if we just concentrate our power, which right now it's mostly in the military, to contain China, what they're doing is they're already waging an economic war against China. And like all these sanctions, they're now Blinken just now threatening more sanction against China because China continued to trade with Russia. These are just excuses. Their sanction on Russia is just a blueprint for their planned sanction against China. And the goal has always been economic strangulation. So China, the goal is to collapse the Chinese economy, like they said. so China no longer poses threat to the top dog position of the United States. But that's not going to work. I mean, they try that with Russia, it's not going to work. If they try with China, that will end disastrously for United States. But the problem is these people are out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with even average reality of average working class Americans. They think they still right now what US is trying to do, even when they're trying to say, okay, we just got to bring the manufacturing back to the United States, et cetera, they're just going for military Keynesianism. They're like, okay, you know what, we are still strong in our military, so we're gonna just put even more money into the military industrial complex. We're gonna give more money to Lockheed Martin, to Boeing. What a great job Boeing has been doing lately, huh? And then they're and that's not gonna work, man. That's what they have. They're just doubling down on what they actually have been doing for past decades. They're like, okay, well, since only industry we have right now is building weapons, then we're just gonna build more weapons. Yeah, that's really gonna help. I mean, what U.S. working classes really need is they okay. So if you work for those industry, maybe shipbuilding, you work in shipyard, okay, maybe you will see some tangible benefit. But even there, U.S. have outsourced its shipbuilding to East Asia a long time ago, since the 70s. Now the U.S. Navy has to go to South Korea and Japan for help for naval buildup, because majority of the world's shipbuilding now is in East Asia. 50% of them in China, and the rest, the other is in South Korea or in Japan. And this is the problem. The problem is that the people who live in the Beltway bubble, they don't really know what's going on inside their own country, let alone what's happening in China. They really think they can still pull this off, but it's not going to work. We all know it's not going to work.
I'm gonna play one more clip for you, and because I know you're on diaper duty.
my eldest 3-year-old just came up here and to look for me.
I understand. I'm gonna play this clip, and I want you to give me your take on this, and we'll wrap it up after that. So I want you to pay close attention to this.
Well, I
this is
think
1
the
minute.
idea of de-dollarization is one which is going to be necessary. You have two aspects to it. One is the efforts of the United States to dictate the rules of trade and currency to all nations, which is the basis of the dollar system or the petrodollar system, is no longer valid. This was a neo-colonial system that was imposed largely through the military force of the United States and NATO, regime change, for example, against Gaddafi, the attempt to overthrow the Assad government, the Iraq attack, and now the Ukraine war, so to try to weaken Russia. But it's not going to work. Many countries around the world, especially in the so-called global south, are now moving out from under this so-called rules-based order. And this new deal between France and China is an example of that. You also had the Chinese involvement in the rapprochement between Syria and Iran. I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia and Iran. We also see trade going between India and Russia with a ruble-rupiah transaction basis. So we're in an era where the unipolar order doesn't function. And we see it with the collapse of the banks in the United States, the collapse of the Swiss giant Credit Suisse, the toppling, or the teetering, I should say, of the Deutsche Bank. So we're moving into a new era in which the emphasis will be on multilateralism rather than rule by one unipolar power.
That sums up the dollar-based system pretty good. What do you say about the miscalculations? Because that's what we're seeing right now. Multiple miscalculations by Western leaders when concerning Russia, Iran, South Africa, and especially China. They believe that because the Chinese have been patient, have been quiet, does not indulge in all of that uh, talk of war and braggadocious talk. They believe that somehow they have cowered them, and I think that is a miscalculation because um, someone told me a while ago that when the Chinese get started, it's hard to get them off of you to stop them when it's war. We saw that in the 1962 war. Um, New Delhi is still there because the Chinese put restraints on themselves and pulled back, but they could have went to New Delhi if they wanted to. So do you believe that because America is losing her position, her dollar, which is the number one instrument of power for the military and for the empire, do you believe that is why she is really focusing on China because she sees China as the one nation that can supplant her militarily, politically, and economically?
They're really worried about China in the Middle East. I mean, back in 2000, so Alan Greenspan in his memoir about Iraq War, he already said United States didn't go to Iraq to grab the oil. They went to Iraq to dictate the flow of the oil. Because even back in early 2000, China already industrialized, and U.S. itself is becoming more self-sufficient in oil and gas, whereas China was becoming the largest importer of oil and gas from Middle East. So they wanted to control the Iraqi oil. They saw the Chinese company was already going to Iraq, setting up oil exploration. So they want to put a stop to that, and also to defend the status of petrodollar, because one of the basis of petrodollar is Saudi trade oil in dollar. So then anybody who needs oil needs U.S. dollars. And that worked also for United States because back then a lot of those dollars get recycled back into the U.S. economy because before 70s, U.S. was still an industrial power. So a lot of the money the Saudi used to purchase, United States used to purchase oil, U.S. dollars. Saudi turned around and used those dollars to buy manufactured goods from U.S. So a lot of this money actually cycled back to the U.S. economy. And now they see the circulation going the other way. And Saudis, China is purchasing oil from Middle East, and then Middle East turn around, use the money to buy Chinese manufactured goods. And what they're really scared of is now if everybody agreed to switch from petrodollar to petro yuan, then all this money now trillions of dollars going to cycle through the Chinese economy to even make Chinese economy even more powerful, supercharge it, rather than park all that dollars in U.S. treasuries. and this is what U.S. wants to do. They want all the dollars to come back to the U.S. treasuries. So this is one of the U.S. grand strategy in Middle East is to divide and conquer, to encourage the division between the Sunni world led by Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this is why they're trying to broker a peace between Sunni Arab countries and Israel. This was started with Jared Kushner under Trump in the Abraham Accord, and what Biden is trying to do not Biden. Sorry, Biden doesn't do anything. what Jake Sullivan, Biden's security advisor, is trying to do, national security advisor is trying to get Saudi and Israel to normalize relationship. And if that had happened, it would completely marginalize Palestinians because with all these Arab and Muslim countries now recognizing Israel as a legitimate entity. But October 7th completely changed that. After October 7th, no Arab Muslim majority countries are going to come and stand. Oh, we're going to normalize relationship with Israel. I'm going to recognize Israel at this point. No country can afford to do that now. Palestinian issue now is back on the forefront, center stage, and this is what United States is worried about. That's why they have some ridiculous segment on CNN saying, Anti-Semitism is on the rise in China. They're supporting the Palestinian cause in China. Totally unacceptable. I mean, like they're panicking. They're panicking because the whole U.S. grand strategy in Middle East is in shambles. They're still pushing. They're still trying to put. I mean, like I just saw an article in the Cradle, which reports on Middle East. They said Jordan was being pushed by the United States to trying to stop the Palestinian reconciliation talk in Beijing, because Hamas and the Palestinian Authority was supposed to have another meeting in Beijing at the end of the last month. But Jordan interceded on behalf of the United States and to tell the Palestinian Authority President Abbas that don't do this, don't go to Beijing. And so the United States is still trying to do this, but I don't think this. I mean, they're going against the trend of history now. They're on the wrong side of history, and I have full confidence that they're not going to succeed. The people in the Arab countries, they have seen the tremendous amount of damage that United States have brought on their people, and there's no United States is nobody sees United States as a neutral, honest broker in Middle East conflict. It's one of the instigators. The Biden administration continued to be the main backer of Israeli genocide in Gaza. So, and Saudi Arabia, they traditionally rely on United States for security guarantees, but they now see which way the wind is blowing. This is why the Saudi-Iran peace deal happened in the first place, right? They know it's not going to be the path the U.S. had laid out for them. That might not work out in the long run. They're looking for alternatives, and China offers that viable alternative.
And Carl, I'm gonna let you go because I know that you have diaper duty. But on our next show that you and I do together, when we started off, I want to ask you. I have something on my mind about what just took place with the Israeli bombing in Yemen, and I want to bring up a map, and I want to bring something to your attention, and I want to get your insight on it, because I think it's very important. So we got to do this very soon again, Carl.
Oh yeah. I look forward to it. I mean, Israel have tried to widen this conflict ever. They have always tried to bring the conflict outside of the border of what Israel currently controls, because their whole goal has been dragging United States deeper and deeper into this, and right now it doesn't look like the U.S. leadership have any alternative vision, either Harris or Trump. They're both 100% Israel supporters. So this insane policy is going to continue. The situation in Middle East is going to continue to escalate, and Israel is not doing itself any favors by going on warpath and also continuously posting their war crime on social media. I mean, this is all going to be further evidence saved later for genocide trial. So, I look forward to our next conversation. But thank you again, Rasheed, for having me. Thank you for Rasheed's family. I remember.
Yeah.
Shout
Carl,
out to Rasheed's family. Yeah.
be blessed. Take care of that beautiful new baby of yours, man. Give my love to your family and be safe, my brother.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye. Everybody, thank you. Please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Let me say that again. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and share, because we're going up against the algorithm. We're going up against YouTube unsubscribing people. So I would really need you guys to do that, and join us on Twitter, join us on Patreon, become a channel member, join us on the Red Pill Diaries, the Red Pill Journals, Locals. That's the empowerment of truth.locals.com. Join us on Rumble. Join us on Odyssey. We'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving us your time, because we know that time is the most precious commodity that you could ever have, because it's an unrenewable resource. So we hope that while you have spent your time with us, the return is an equal or greater satisfaction that you have gained. On that note, know that I go out the same way that I always come in, with love in my heart for each and every one of you who loves truth. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. And remember this: do good to others, not because you want to be seen, but do good to others because it is the right thing to do. And when nobody else is looking, always remember God is watching. On that note, I go out like that. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. I love you and thank you all. We're out of here. Peace.